Hello YouTube, it's Buddha Gem here, and still playing with the new camera, as you can see. Since I've become a member of YouTube, I've gotten an awful lot of questions about anarchism. Some are wonderfully ambiguous, like, explain it to me. Others are more pointed. Fellow YouTuber Anarko Fred recently asked me some questions that seemed fairly representative of what I hear, so I thought I'd take a moment to answer those questions. How can socialism anarchy avoid free people to keep producing goods on their own, or selling their labor force and claiming the fruits of their work as property and trade it as they wish? Question number one. Question number one. How can a socialism anarchy avoid free people to keep producing goods on their own or selling their labor force and claiming the fruits of their work as their property and trade it as they wish? Translation: what if I don't want to be an anarchist because I think it would be better to exploit people and live off their labor? Okay, that's at least my translation. But let me try and answer the question anyway. Now, to the first part, there's nothing inherently wrong with producing something and selling it, so that's that answer. But it's really the second part that grabs my eye. What would keep people from selling their labor force? Let's just take a second to look at what that really means. Selling your labor force essentially means selling yourself. You cannot separate yourself from your labor force. It's not some abstract thing you can sell on the free market. It's you. And you have to ask yourself, why, in a free and just society, would you ever want to sell yourself to someone else? I would argue that in a functioning anarchist society, the thought of selling oneself would never occur. Slavery would truly be abolished. And what I really see in this question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what if we decide we don't want to be part of your anarchist society and we want to develop in our own way? It's a fair enough question, but from the wording of it, it's also obvious how they would want to develop. They would want to maintain a certain level of hierarchy and authority so that they can benefit from the labor of others. Let's just say Bob and his group of friends want to develop their own vision of the free market. What would we do? Get a rope. No, I'm kidding. Of course. Anarchy is, of course, based on freedom of association. And if a group of individuals didn't want to be part of our society, they would have that right. However, they would not have the right to develop private property or modes of authority that would allow them to exploit others. Hopefully, most of you understand the difference between possession and property. The anarchist FAQ, which I'll provide some links to, has a very good in-depth answer to this question and others that we'll deal with here. You can go check that out and read in more detail. The following paragraph is actually from that. Such a ban on private property would not be a restriction on liberty simply because stopping the development of authority hardly counts as an authoritarian act. For an analogy, supporters of capitalism do not think that banning theft is a restriction of liberty, and because this view, currently accepted by the majority, it is enforced on the minority. Even the word ban is wrong, as it would be capitalist who is trying to ban freedom for others on their property. Members of a free society would simply refuse to recognize the claims of private property. They would simply ignore the would-be capitalist pretensions and keep out signs, and without a state or hired thugs to back up their claims, they just end up looking silly. On to question number 2. How can a socialism anarchy deal with criminal acts? And by criminal acts he means murder, robbery, rape, polluting. Is there any rule of law? When we talk about an anarchist society, we're talking about, I think, a very organic and natural form of society. And one thing can be fairly certain of. The majority of crimes that are committed now simply wouldn't exist in an anarchist society. Utopian dream? No, just reality. Why? Because the majority of crimes committed are property crimes, essentially theft of one sort or another. In a society where wealth was equitably shared, theft would be a rather strange crime. Why steal what you can have? Moreover, the many victimless crimes, drug use, prostitution, gambling, would also no longer be crimes. Also, try and put these things in perspective. Rape and murders combined only comprise about 8% of crimes annually. So, Obviously, in a society that didn't believe in property rights, property crimes just wouldn't exist. You have about a 90% reduction in crime right off the bat. It's not to say that crime wouldn't exist. There's certainly going to be still antisocial individuals. Things are going to happen. And to answer that part of the question, we certainly wouldn't have anything like the criminal justice system we have now. And this is a debatable thing, but the view most often expressed, and one that I happen to agree with, is that we would simply go by custom. That is, we would collectively decide how to deal with crimes that arose, and what constitutes a crime would be based on custom. You can get a more detailed explanation at the Anarchist FAQ. Question number 3. If everything is democratically managed, how can you avoid majority dictatorship and or centralization and or eventually plutocracy? Considering that no matter the society, human beings are mostly driven by self-interest and greed, people can be tempted to use violence and cunning in search of wealth and power. I think it's funny that Anarko Fred says this, because that wasn't what concerned Madison and the Founding Fathers. You can read it in the Federalist Paper number 10, where he openly admits that the chief concern was that a majority faction would want a more equitable distribution of wealth. That seems to be a reoccurring theme among Enlightenment thinkers, actually. In fact, there was a recent study done, I think it was the University of San Diego, that seems to indicate that people have a natural propensity toward socialism. I don't know how one goes from a majority dictatorship, whatever that means, to a plutocracy, which is essentially what we have now in this country. Finally, I strongly disagree with your assertions that humans are fundamentally driven by self-interest and greed. That may be what the plutocrats who own and control most of the world's wealth want you to believe, but there's no scientific evidence to back that up. In fact, we should all be cautious in assuming human nature is this way or that way. You can look all over the world and find people working and doing great things and gaining little or no benefit personally from any of it. Since March of this year, for instance, the New York District Council of Carpenters has been sending volunteers down to New Orleans to help rebuild firehouses damaged by Hurricane Katrina. We take a week off work with no pay for our way down there, our meals, bring our own tools, and work for free. So far, we've rebuilt 12 firehouses. There's a million examples of people doing stuff like this all over the world, and it flies directly in the face of your assertion about human nature. The last question from Anarko Fred, or more of a statement, says, some anarchists told me that education to anarchy and socialism would change the values of mankind for good, and no more self-interest, greed, search for power, violence, cunning. My response: a society certainly can impact the way we view the world. In our current capitalist economy, we are in constant competition with our fellow worker. Natural feelings of solidarity are pushed to the side as we struggle to make it in this dog-eat-dog system. But if you take a look at what happens, particularly during natural disasters of one kind or another, you see that natural solidarity rise to the top. I just spent a week in New Orleans listening to people tell their stories, and every one of them was about self-sacrifice and doing what needed to be done to help others. I don't think it's much of a stretch to envision a society where natural solidarity is nurtured and encouraged on a regular basis. Well, I hope I've answered the questions to your satisfaction. I hope you all have a great night. Take care.